Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Dr. Kali Namdar, your host for tonight's panel discussion, and we're so honored that you've come here tonight and that you've made the time to be here. Tonight's presentation is an interactive Q&A with Dr. Shana Friedman and Yeshaya Krause of Shalom Taskforce, empowering students to build positive connections. We will be hosting monthly webinars in support of educator well-being as part of Ohel's Teacher Support Helpline. I'm Dr. Kali Namdar, Trauma Sensitive Services Coordinator at Ohel, and I'm going to be moderating tonight's event. Just a little bit of information about Ohel's Teacher Support Helpline. We are a free, confidential space for educators to support their personal well-being or challenges that they may be facing in the classroom. We have a team of experienced school psychologists and mental health professionals that are available to answer your call. You can always reach us, teachersupport@ohelfamily.org, and our number is 718-686-3230. We're staffed from Monday through Thursday, 12 till 2 p.m., 4 to 6 p.m., and 9 to 10 p.m. Tonight's program is a really exciting partnership with Shalom Taskforce, with Hidden Sparks, the Jewish Education Project, and Prisma, and we're funded by UJA Federation of New York. A little bit of information about our panelists for tonight. Dr. Shana Friedman, PhD, LCSW, is the Executive Director of Shalom Taskforce. Her leadership is informed by her work as a trauma-informed therapist and an advocate, and her work in the field of domestic abuse and family violence within the Jewish community for over 20 years. She's the co-chair of the UJA Task Force on Family Violence and serves on the advisory board of the New York City Mayor's Office. Shana lectures regularly about domestic violence, sexual abuse, trauma, and culturally informed practice, and has published on related topics. About Yeshaya Krause. Yeshaya Krause, LCSW, is the director of Shalom Task Force's Education Department. He works to expand both the scope and depth of community and school-based educational programming with a focus on healthy relationships and abuse awareness. He also has a private practice in Far Rockaway, working with individuals, couples, and parents. Tonight's program is unique in that it's in honor of October as National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Ohel's domestic violence program offers confidential, free support to survivors of intimate partner abuse at any stage of their relationship. And among the services the program offers are trauma-informed counseling, case management, workshops and events, culturally sensitive safe dwellings, also known as shelters, and 3 weekly groups, a psychoeducational group, support group, and a second support group for Hebrew-speaking women. These services are free, confidential, and available to anyone who wonders if she may be experiencing partner abuse. For more information, you can always reach out to access@ohelfamily.org. Now, we're going to hear more about Shalom Task Force's incredible work in this sphere as well. But we're going to begin tonight. We've had a number of people reach out with questions. Just for your information tonight, if you have a question that you would like answered, feel free to put it in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer all questions that come in. So the first question that I want to ask Dr. Shana, if that's okay, how is Shalom Task Force relevant to a conversation with educators?
Thank you so much for having us tonight. It's really a pleasure to collaborate today. And always, we have a very strong and close relationship with Ohel, working with the Domestic Violence Services Program, with education programs. And it's wonderful to be here and to be here in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I often think about Domestic Violence Awareness Month as a hard month because it's always October. And when you work in the Jewish community, it's hard for us to, find ways of really honoring it and making sure that we note it. And awareness is so key to our work, and it's so key to what Ohel does, because every time we run it, we have an event, someone comes forward, either for themselves or someone they know, to help them get the assistance they need. So thank you for noting that, and thank you for being such a wonderful partner right after the Chagim. So thank you, and thank you everybody for attending. When we think about Shalom Task Force, I imagine most of you, if I would poll you, you would say, "What's Shalom Task Force?" That's that ad in the Jewish press or in the Ami or in Mishpacha and says you're not alone. You know, it's a hotline, and that is very much part of what we do. We're a hotline, chat line service for the Jewish community, and really often the first address for people to come to. And we have legal services, but I would say, and I think I could speak for Yeshaya, and I could speak for most of the agency, is that our passion is prevention. You know, many of us talk about how we'd love to be out of this business, and we would love to see that we could work more with the community, with educators, with schools before the situations happen that they have to call our hotline. So that's why we're here, really, to think about how can we work and support educators in the work of helping students and empowering them to have healthy connections and healthy relationships and creating that support systems. And we see teachers as the real front line. So our work today, our conversation today is really about focusing on helping students and helping them create healthy connections and healthy relationships now and through their lifespan as they grow. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You know, in the work that we're doing at Ohel, we're doing a lot of work now in the sphere of building resilience with educators as a parallel process for themselves, and also working with educators on building resilience in students. And what we're really seeing, particularly since COVID, is how much teachers really are on the front lines. And, you know, our approach has almost become, you know, we look at teachers almost as deputy mental health professionals, because teachers are with students all day through thick and thin. You know, teachers are with students, you know, in times of calm, in times of crisis, in times of chaos. And, you know, the teacher's ability to co-regulate and be there with students has such a strong impact and such power. So
and I would add, I mean, I would add that there are the front lines also. The way I speak to you, the teachers, like, you see things that other people don't have the opportunity to see, and you'll notice things. Right. And you know, we're able to help with the interventions, all of us, whatever that would mean, because you have that ability to be there and be present more often than most people.
Yeah, and I think also just like in different settings, like, you know, when we're home with our kids, we're not necessarily going to see them interacting with peers. We're not going to be able to see them necessarily interacting in the social settings that they are in school. So it's really just a matter of being able to have those eyes on the ground, so to speak, to see kids in those situations where parents aren't going to be aware of it and can't be aware of it, because it's such a totally different dynamic.
Right. Right. Okay. So I'm wondering, Yeshaya, if you could answer for us, what would you say the role of teachers is in helping to foster healthy peer and ultimately adult relationships?
So, I mean, you think about it, there are a few different pieces to this. I mean, first off, and I think this goes across from K to 12 and beyond. First of all, the most obvious one would be modeling. And when a child goes into a classroom, let's start at the beginning. You have a child going into a kindergarten class, and the teacher looks at the child and treats the child with respect. And then the teacher looks at the other children and treats them with respect, and all the while is able to maintain the appropriate role of a teacher as somebody who's maintaining boundaries and structure within the classroom and enabling them to learn, being supportive of their learning goals. And the whole time has that basic foundation of respect. The child, whether they're conscious of it or not, is going to have that, is going to add that framework to the way they understand how relationships are supposed to work. So the same way that we would tell parents that when you're modeling relationships, whatever behaviors you model at home are going to be integrated into the child's kind of, I guess you could call it, behavioral encyclopedia in their minds. They're going to, it's the same way at school. So that's really the first thing, without even doing anything overtly, is to be conscious of is that teachers are modeling something. So being conscious of that is tremendously important, and modeling that sense of respect, whether it's towards peers, whether it's towards towards students, whoever it's towards, is a major part of it. Then there's also modeling how you handle adversity. I think like those two things are probably the most key for long-term relationships. When you're modeling respect, you're setting that up for long-term. When you're modeling I'm handling adversity gracefully, you're setting that up as well. That foundation of respect and healthy assertiveness, is those two are key. And then on a more active role, there's, as we said, you're seeing the different things that children may be getting themselves into, and students and young teens and older teens, you know, from K to 12, we're seeing it. The teachers are the ones who are there and they're seeing it. And they may be in a position to, provide greater understanding for other people in the support group, whether it's parents, whether it's other teachers, whether it's school administrators, or whether it's the students themselves, if that kind of a relationship exists. And it's an interesting thing to think about it. Like, I'm not sure where the teachers who are on right now come from, whether it's the younger grades, the older grades, high schools. But you think about it, if you have even, you can have a student who maybe 4 or 5 years out after high school thinks, I have something going on in my life. And I remember there was this one teacher back in high school that I really connected with, or there was this one teacher. I mean, I've heard of stories where people kept up with their 6th or 7th grade teachers because that was somebody who really gave them the time and focused on them and really helped them to pursue life on their own terms. And they connected with them. So that's another way, that's another potential role that a teacher can play in helping individuals, young individuals, as they get older, foster healthy and peer and ultimately adult relationships.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we can never underestimate the power that an educator has in someone else's life.
Yeah.
And yeah, educators really do help build a child's schema, their understanding of what a relationship is, what it looks like. So thank you for speaking to that.
Just one very powerful story.
Sure.
One teacher came over to me. He was a young teacher, wasn't there all that long. I think he had just started out as teaching actually, and he had been tutoring for a while as when he was in base medrash, whatever it was. And he told me that somebody came over to him, one of the kids he used to tutor, came over to him. This is like 3 or 4 years after he was tutoring him. And he says to him, you should know that that one conversation that you had with me 4 years ago, it really made an impact on the way I think. He's like looking at him like, I don't remember the conversation. I just don't. So it was like such a slip of the moment kind of a thing, that he was in the right place, in the right time, in the right headspace, and he was able to say something which was so powerful for this one person. For him, it was just like, okay, it's just a conversation. But there's such power in these individual moments, in those moments when we're connecting with people, can really make such an impact, and we can really take advantage of that.
Right. Again, for the audience, if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer, just put them in the Q&A box and we'd be happy to respond to them. Okay, so that brings me to a question that I've been thinking about. If we're talking about understanding teen development, right? We're talking about understanding the emotional versus intellectual development of a child. Are they related, intertwined? What is going on? Can you speak to that, Yeshaya?
Sure. So teens, if anybody who's ever dealt with teens knows that teens are kind of like a bria b'fnei atzmam. They're like a thing unto themselves. There's, on the one hand, you can have them railing about how they're not allowed to do anything independently, and on the other, and then the next minute they're asking you to drive them someplace. I think that's like such a perfect example of the balance that teenagers are trying to strike. On the one hand, they're kind of coming into themselves. They're experimenting with their own independence. They're trying to strive for their own identity and really understand who they are, where they fit into the bigger picture of what life is. And life incorporates so many different parts. You think about it, there's the academic part of things, there's the religious part of things, the social part, the family part, there's financial parts. Sometimes, kids want to have their own money. There are all these different moving pieces, and they really need what they're going for is looking for a way to balance out everything in a way that makes them feel good about themselves and makes them feel accepted. So let's say you may have any number of different kinds of children, different teenagers from different backgrounds who are going to end up playing that in very different ways. So let's say you have somebody who, I'm not generalizing, I'm just using this as an example. Let's say somebody who comes from a loving family where there's a healthy attachment, there's healthy relationships with parents, and they live a certain way. Then it's very possible that student may not feel so much tension with that particular way of life, and may be perfectly happy to pursue that way of life without thinking about it too much. That's like just one example. And that student's push for individuality may come out in very nuanced ways. And then you can have people who are maybe very unhappy with their background. I'm just giving this again as an extreme example of how just to illustrate the difference of where you have somebody who does not necessarily have those solid, healthy attachments and may feel more tension with the way of life that he's been brought up in, and feels the need to experiment to find a different path that he can be comfortable and feel like he can fit into. So it's really all about that, trying to kind of identify themselves and solidify something that a self-image that they're comfortable with. Now, along with that kind of comes in the classic balance of intellect versus emotion. I kind of like to think of it as two completely different languages. It's like when you're a baby, you're first born, you speak emotion. That's the language that you speak. It's completely emotion. Other people don't speak your language, and it's up to parents to try to have to learn that. And teachers also, when you're dealing with any children, really, or even adults also speak to an extent. As we get older, we're introduced to this new language of intellect, and as teenagers trying to find that identity, they're kind of trying to balance these things out. Very often teenagers are more weighed towards emotional thinking. Because they're more weighed to emotional thinking, it ends up things end up being very black and white sometimes. There's less ability to see nuance, there's more impulsiveness involved. And that's really where adults come in to an extent. Beforehand, when we were talking about how we as adults, as teachers, can influence the students that we're working with, adults can help them to kind of acknowledge those gray areas. We can't push anything necessarily. You know, if students are going to do what they're going to do,
Right.
They're going to end up making their own decisions, and they're going to end up creating their own path. Our job, to an extent, part of our job, is to give them the extra space to think about the different possibilities before making those decisions. Not to necessarily push our own agenda, but to help them pursue their agenda with the fullest extent of knowledge that they possibly can. And because they're in that space of leaning towards emotion, usually black and white thinking, or more so than they might be if they were older and more experienced, that perspective doesn't always include a lot of those gray areas. So we can really give them that.
Right, right. You know, we often refer to adolescence as a time of storm and stress, right? Speaks to the emotion that's weighing so heavily. We just have a question that came in, Dr. Friedman. When you talk about prevention, what is it that you are looking to prevent? What are you striving for?
Right. This is my personal passion project, is like, what do we do to prevent, and what are we actually trying to prevent? So what are we trying to build? What are we trying to build as a community? What are we trying to build in our families and our students? So when I speak to young adults around, you know, what is domestic violence and what are we looking for, I often speak about the continuum of relationships. And I always talk about, we strive to be in healthy, or what I will call healthy enough relationships. So we don't have to have perfect relationships. We're trying to help people build healthy enough relationships. And we think about, like, what are the core aspects of what it means to be in, to be able to function within, and to find a healthy enough relationship. And I would say, I think we all would want our students and our children to be able to become, you know, grow into healthy adults and enter healthy enough relationships as part of that life. And so I often dial it back to this concept of boundaries, right? We start with boundaries, is that if we could help model and teach and intervene in ways to help young children, you know, elementary school children, middle school children, teens, you know, as different places to learn about their boundaries and what are boundaries. So if you look at like a textbook definition, you're looking at, like, you know, a mark or something between us, but really, right, really what boundaries are in relationships is it's really talking about what the set of rules that we function with each other and our expectations of each other, right? So from simple things, the cashier at the store, how we're supposed to function with that, to what it means to be in a peer group and how we should function as a peer, and that how boundaries could be fluid, but there still are personal boundaries, emotional, physical boundaries, and then boundaries between parents and children, and boundaries between in intimate relationships, boundaries between teachers and students. So throughout all that, we want to teach and model boundaries that are clear, that are respectful, And that to me is core to prevention, right? If we have children and adolescents and then young adults who are learning about boundaries and learning about themselves and how to assert themselves and be able to kind of feel if boundaries are being violated, that's a key part of prevention. Now, of course, I'm coming here from Shalom Taskforce. So, you know, our lens around prevention is really like, how do we make sure, how do we help our community have less incidences of domestic violence, right? We'd like our hotline not to ring. Right, we'd like people not to need that service. So how do we do that? So we're talking about how do we help people learn about themselves, learn about boundaries, learn about looking for what is going on in a relationship and being able to understand if things aren't feeling the right way. And it does also come down to this idea of boundaries related to power and control in a relationship, because in the worst case scenarios that we deal with, right, in domestic violence, there's one party that's obtaining power and control over the other person and really abusing them and controlling them. And in relationships throughout our lives, you know, there's our power and control dynamics. That's real, right? That's real in healthy enough relationships. That's real in teachers certainly have more power than children, and they should, right? But there should be clear and appropriate boundaries around there. Parents have healthy power over their children, right? They have to create structure. They need to give rules. There needs to be structure, but how do you do that? And we find that people who are modeled to and helped to create and have their own sense of boundaries are able to notice later. So if they are in a relationship where there's inappropriate boundaries, where boundaries are being violated, where there's an inappropriate use of power and control, they're able to say, uh-oh, this doesn't feel right, and get the help, or that will be part of the prevention, right? So to us, we see that that the building blocks towards healthy enough relationships through life are part of all that. So that's how I think about prevention. And so that's what we're striving for.
We've got some questions that have just come in. If we could draw a parallel to the school experience, right? We've got teenagers, often there's a power differential there too, where, you know, you've got like the in-group, you've got the out-group, you've got, you know, back when I was growing up, we called it cliques. I'm not even sure if we'll call it.
I remember those well.
Right?
Sometimes I was in them, sometimes I was out of them, right? Like that's real.
Right. So we're getting a number of questions here. We've gotten some questions about peer pressure. You know, if the whole group is, you know, identifying one way and everybody in that group is, let's say, smoking, and, you know, a person is trying to, you know, do I join and what everybody else is doing, or, you know, how do I develop my own strength, my own identity, and stay strong to the values that I have? And then we've got another question here about a school that is currently experiencing a group of students that are socially bringing each other down in a really toxic way, right? If we could draw a parallel to what may be going on in a middle school or a high school, how does one help foster a happy social environment when the students feel down, when the girls feel down, and that nothing is good enough for them? It's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Answer.
Yeah, you want me to take that, Shalom?
Go for it. Do you want to start, or?
Yeah, I can start that. So I mean, I think that a big part of that is that, first off, as we said before, that like kids are going to end up making their own decisions to an extent. There are certain things we are honestly not going to be able to stop. You know, like the smoking. Obviously, we would love it if kids did not smoke, but it's something that we have to kind of understand may end up happening, because people at that stage will experiment with different things. That being said, we can control the culture in which they're doing things, the culture in which they exist. We can control that to an extent. So like take that group of students that you said was bringing each other down. So what kinds of efforts can we make to create a conscious effort, a conscious focus on positivity? Back when I was working I have a history of working in different schools around the area as well. And I remember there was this one program that we ran, which was really very exciting. We ran it for about a month, in which all students were given, there were like sticky notes posted throughout the hallways, and the students would basically tell on each other when they saw them doing something good. Like they would write it down on a sticky note and they would post it on the hallway, to the point where you had the entire stairwell plastered with these yellow sticky notes, and there were raffles and there were all sorts of exciting things. You had first grade students writing notes for 8th grade teachers that they saw them helping someone with whatever it was. And it changed the culture of that school, that there was just such a focus on looking for positivity. There was such a focus on not just looking for it, but doing positivity. It's like I remember it was so funny. There was these 2 kids, I think they were in 4th grade. They were saying like, haha, we're gonna cheat. I'm gonna do something nice for you, and then you're gonna write me up, and then back and forth. It was very cute, but that's exactly what we were going for, and it worked. So on whatever level we're able to integrate that into the way we run the classrooms and in the way we run schools, even creating that kind of a culture where positivity is a focus. I'm not saying, I don't think that would necessarily work in that format for, say, I don't know, a boys' high school or something. Might be a little off-putting for them, but there are ways to do it. There are ways to create programs and to create a culture around the characteristics that we want to foster in the students. So whether it's
I often think, I often think about culture as like the implementation of values, right? So if we, right, like you think about culture and that, so if you're able to help clarify what the values of our schools are, right? Our values of our schools are respect, right? Our values of our schools kindness. Like, how do we find ways that we're modeling that and we're helping people find opportunity to implement that? Now, I can remember high school, so where there were cliques. That's what it was called back then, and people felt there was a lot of negativity. And there are times, and I defer to experts of this within the school system. There are times where there needs to be some significant intervention, right? If it's really feeling very toxic, is it somehow coming together and making some significant changes? Are there certain students that need individual intervention, right? And not to, I'll plug your work, Dr. Namdar. I mean, like, how do we get help for that, right? Is there, Ohel offers this helpline to help educators figure out what to do and look at their colleagues. I like what is out there to help kind of break the toxic culture and the toxic environment and bring in some positivity. And it's really hard. It's really hard.
It's really
hard. Like,
having been in, I think the first step is acknowledging, the reality that we're in. But I will say that, and I think we're going to get to this soon, that really helping adolescents define who they are, what their role is, how they see themselves beyond the here and now, because often they're caught up in their little bubble and their little world. As amazing as our kids are, it's really important to help them sometimes step outside themselves and really connect to a sense of meaning and purpose. And we do that through, there are some incredible programs out there, and it doesn't have to be something fancy. Right. There's all kinds of, chesed or service programs, all kinds of things that schools can do and people can promote to really help children connect with a sense of purpose, connect with a sense of meaning, and really help them to define who they are, who they want to be, and how they want to be in relationship with others. And I think that that's really the core of what we're talking about tonight, is this idea that educators and school counselors and all the people that are working with students today, youth support professionals, camp counselors, big sisters in school, we've got some schools have big sister, little sister programs, helping children see beyond themselves and connect to that sense of purpose and meaning opens them up to a bigger world. And I think that, as busy as a lot of people are on social media, I think like stepping out of that too and connecting to that meaning and purpose in the real world is something that is incredibly powerful. So that actually brings me to, I see we've got a lot of questions coming in. One of the questions that we have is, what do we do if we notice students talking to each other in a disrespectful way? I think this, bridges onto what we've just been talking about. But Yeshaya, could you speak to that?
Yeah, so I mean, again, like I think that really, what I had mentioned about the idea of knowing that it is going to happen, just because That is the nature of children, that they're experimenting with different modes of socialization to bring in the power and control aspect that they are experimenting with their own power. I now have the power to throw a sharp line at someone else. Let's see what happens with that. Or I now have the power to defend my standing in the group by doing A, B, and C, whatever it is. There is that experimentation that they're doing with that. So knowing that it will happen, that's, I think, first of all, knowing that it will happen. This is not what do we do if it's going to happen. You're going to probably see it. And creating a culture, that kind of culture of respect, where it's the exception and not the rule. And also creating a way for people who have honest grievances with each other to actually discuss these things in a way which actually makes sense. Like one of the things I like to say, and it sounds like such an obvious line, but you think about it, and it takes some thinking. Uncomfortable conversations by definition are uncomfortable. And there are so many people, whether they're 5-year-olds fighting over a snack bag, whether they're 15-year-olds who are doing whatever it is that 15-year-olds are fighting over, or you can even have a married couple that they have a disagreement that they're just not willing to bring up with each other because having that conversation is in and of itself so uncomfortable. Encouraging them to come together in a way which is healthy, in a way which feels safe for both of them, and to talk about whatever it is that they're feeling in the moment and to try to resolve it. They may not be able to resolve it, but at the very least, by giving them that space to exercise respect for themselves by stating their viewpoint in a way which makes sense, and by exercising respect for the other person by giving them the space to say what they need to say and actually listening, can be helpful. So like I think this is also, especially if it's a pattern, like as we said, like kids generally speaking, when they're experimenting with certain things, they're going to end up picking up the cause and effect of it. So if it's a one-time thing and you see that it never happens again, then it's not something that needs to be addressed. If you're seeing that it's a pattern though, then you call over the student. You can speak to the student who you notice who's being disrespected, and speak with that student about what's going on. Say, I noticed it. Be supportive of that person and ask, what kind of help can I give you that would be okay with you? Sometimes students are not going to want the teacher to come over and help because like, oh, okay, the teacher got involved. Now there's a whole teacher's pet aspect of things, which could also be troublesome socially.
So we want school and home to be a safe place for people, right? We want that. We can't have, we don't want students to feel unsafe at school. So not even to the extreme of bullying, but if they're feeling unsafe, they don't feel like they have a social group. Like, we do want to acknowledge that to them in a way that isn't, painful or, but to privately acknowledge that and help people find the skills and connect them to skills that they're able to engage in their social circles in ways that are appropriate and invigorating and and going in the right direction, because we want them to be able to have relationships and be able to see, and we also want students to be up standards for each other, right? We don't want people to, right? We don't want it to just spiral out of control and snowball, and that's what happens, right? One person does it, then the next person does it, the next, and how do we want to break that, right? So
October is actually anti-bullying month.
Oh, so, really?
Yes. Yes. So
it's a very busy month, right? It's like,
I think
we can't get it all in.
It is a busy month, but I want to speak to the fact to something that Yeshaya, you just brought up, this idea of noticing. And it's very powerful when a teacher or someone in school can tell a child, I noticed that, and the child feels that someone's looking out for them.
So powerful.
And someone is preempting, the concern. And there are people who watch what's going on out there. And there's often there's shame. There's, people, if a child is feeling alienated at school or they don't feel safe, one of the first things that we always try to work on is building that connection. So the child has, who is my askable adult? Who is my person that I can talk to? And the power of an adult telling a child, I'm looking out for you. I noticed that. How can I help you? My door is always open. You're always welcome to come and check in. So
I also can I amplify the idea that when we teach children that it's okay to ask for help, we're teaching, we're teaching them that throughout life it's okay to ask for help, and that's such a part of creating a culture in our community which destigmatizes getting assistance, right? So if we know as a child that it's okay to if something's bothering you, to go over to the assistant principal and take a moment to ask, and then when we
Right.
know that as a teen, then we know that as a young married person, if something doesn't feel right, you could reach out, right?
Right.
So those are the type of lessons and the template that we want to build within our community to create ongoing support in all different areas of our lives.
Right.
Yeah.
We have a comment here from one of the viewers tonight that really is spot on. You know, an excellent method of creating a culture of respect in schools is really engaging in a school-wide social emotional learning program. You know, there are incredible programs, evidence-based programs that are out there. Ohel has a range of programs available for schools as well. You're welcome to reach out to teacher support at ohelfamily.org, and you know, we're doing a lot of work in this field as well, and we're happy to support schools, but actively and explicitly teaching these skills from kindergarten, from the youngest of ages all the way through to 12th grade, overtly teaching them, and then also implicitly taking those skills and applying them across curricula are extremely powerful ways to really give over the message that this is really important and this is something that we are spending time engaging in. You know, there's a great book that I recently read. It's called All Learning is Social and Emotional. Yes, schools invest in great social emotional learning programs, but our day-to-day learning and engagement and interaction in the classroom, that's all social and emotional too. Every moment has the power of being a teaching moment.
So in the theme of acknowledging, I want to acknowledge that, you know, it's been a tremendously difficult few years. Dr. Namdar, you're an expert on that, you know, really what's happened with COVID and how our children and how all of us have been impacted. And I feel like I could say on a personal level, I've seen in my own children, like, you know, we're coming to this other end of it. And it's as if we've lost some traction. How do we model this social emotional learning? And we're in a really challenging space. I think that's really, it's really a challenging space right now. And how do we do it all? Right? How do we do it all?
Right. So that leads me to the next question that I'm wondering about. Let's talk a little bit about social media, and let's talk a little bit let's talk a little bit about how social media plays out into peer relationships and pretty much all relationships. And if you could either Shana or Yeshaya, if you could shed some light on that, that would be wonderful.
You want to start or you want me to start?
I'll start with one comment is that often we hear people say to us, so we have the honor of working in schools, the whole continuum of the relationship from Beis Yaakov's yeshivas to the day schools, the co-ed day schools. And the issue of social media comes up in absolutely every school. So, you know, even though we like to say that some of our schools try to shield and protect our children from it, I think that we know, and sometimes parents don't know, that it's everywhere. So we have to deal with it, right? So I appreciate the question because it is so part of our everyday life. And if we're honest, it's part of our adult life, right? Like what is going on out there? Like, you know, what is real, what isn't real, this whole IRL and real life, like what are our relationships really like? And I think it's just important to start with that. So no one needs to tune out or tune in more. It's there for, it's relevant to all of us. Our relationship with social media and helping our children relationship with social media. So I want to start with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think also like just when we think of social media, we have to like really understand like what we generally think about when we say social media and what else there is beyond what we're actually thinking about. I mean, I think many parents, when you hear social media, you're thinking Instagram, you're thinking Snapchat, you're thinking not Facebook so much anymore, but you know, you're thinking like, you know,
BeReal is very
BeReal, that's like the big one these days, which is just very scary. But like you're thinking of all these different platforms. We don't think of the idea that in a way, let's say a student is going onto YouTube to research a certain topic, and they end up in the comment section or something. That in itself is social media. It's where you have people who you really don't know who they are, trading comments and trading ideas, and that's exactly what social media is. And you know, it could be very powerful. It's an amazingly powerful tool that people can use for a lot of good. You hear about these stories about families being reunited after decades of being lost. It's like, it's an amazing thing. And at the same time, it's something that we as parents really need to think about how these things impact ourselves. I heard, I think it was from, I forget who, I think it was Rabbi Zev Brown, spoke at a convention. This is going like years back. This is before social media was even like a huge thing. He was talking about texting, just basic texting, not saying bad or good, just understanding the impact that it has on people who use it as a way of communicating. So what does it gain? It's definitely convenient. It's definitely quick, but you also lose out on understanding body language. You lose out on hearing vocal cues. You lose out on, and now there are emojis in there also, which
Right.
give a whole different level of communication in a different way than if somebody were standing face to face. Like right now, even like you think about it, we have the three of us, we're all seeing each other's faces. We're not making eye contact. We're not. I'm looking at a screen, you're looking at a screen, but we're not actually making eye contact with each other. I'm looking at my picture on the screen. You can't even notice that I'm moving my hands. Like maybe you can see my thumb like popping in over the top of the bottom over there. But we don't see, there's so much of it that we miss out on. And the more we miss out on, the more we don't learn. So to bring it back to students, students who have been online who are online over lockdown, they missed out on a year's worth of seeing friends' body language, picking up social cues that you can't necessarily see just from looking at a face. And I think that this is something which is overall on social media exists. And that's aside from all the images of presenting unrealistic images of how people do things. There are certain, we spoke before about how boundaries are the rules that exist in relationships.
Right.
All of those things change, the expectations change based on what people are going to see on social media.
I think, you know, I'll plug one thing for Shalom Taskforce is that we do go into schools and we do a whole workshop with mostly 9th grade students. That's who most of them are invited, around like relationships and with the intersection. I think we're calling it, what are we calling it now, in virtual reality, you know, relationships and social media and what your life is online. And we can't head to a full workshop about that now, but I think, you know, it's really important to recognize that social media is in a whole, our students and all of us are living in this other world at the same time, right? And we have to help them. It goes back to the same boundaries and same understanding. We have to help them and help ourselves understand how that impacts us, right? So even the WhatsApp groups for the classes, right? Even the, you know, that like, I mean, if we're all going to be real, like there's bullying that goes on, that people feel excluded. There's the offshoot of the WhatsApps. I mean, have them in our families too, right? The sisters groups, this group, you know, and what is that experience like? And it does come back to in many ways, like knowing yourself, having opportunities to know yourself, figuring out your own boundaries and what feels comfortable and safe, having people to support you, right? Support you in building yourself that way, right? And then be able to respond. And if things do not feel good, right? And things do get uncomfortable, where do you get help for that?
Yeah.
So it doesn't spiral out of control, because that's so, you know, unfortunately, all of us here know of instances where things became, you know, started as a little bit, you know, and a little innocent and became very not innocent and quite honestly dangerous for
Right.
for students in our schools. Right. And where in there is there a space, right, that people feel comfortable coming out, and that is true for all relationships in real life and online. How do we teach people to really be in touch with that, right? And so that they know, and to know, and we talk about that a lot, right? How do we know? How do we make sure we communicate that there is help? Right? Make sure that you don't have to do this by yourselves, and that you are allowed to mess up, right? Kids mess up, we all mess up. You are allowed to mess up. Things don't have to be perfect, and there's ways that we can help you, because that's where it goes. That's where we see it get really hard, right? When people don't realize.
I think going beyond that also is trusting your intuition, right? And we're talking a lot about creating that mindful space where you trust yourself. When something doesn't feel right, you know, we talk about permission to post, you know, finding, can I post this? What about permission to pause? Where when your reaction is telling you something doesn't feel right, trust that reaction that you have, trust yourself, and just take a step back and give yourself that space. And that can be so helpful. We have a bunch of questions that have come in. And the question that I would like to ask is, what happens if a child reports domestic violence at home?
Okay.
And how do we create support for a child? Or what if you're a teacher and you notice that something is, let's say, going on at parent-teacher conferences that is leaving you concerned? We have another, we have another question here, that what if you know that your student has a really difficult family situation and she's acting out? And, you're the teacher, you have to teach content, but you have all these concerns that you're aware of. How do we be supportive? How should we be sensitive in our roles as educators?
There's a lot to tackle. Let me try to tackle that. The first, I took some notes here. The first question of what happens if you believe that a child in your class is witnessing domestic violence at home? I'm not here in any position as an attorney. I think that's something you really have to figure out what you as a mandated reporter, what you need to report. People here are logging in from all over the country. It differs in different states, but I would strongly recommend that you get the support you need to make sure that you make the calls that are necessary. And I'm just putting that out there. Obviously, those are complicated and hard phone calls to make, but often important and life-saving calls that we've had to make in our lives. So I'm going to put that to the side, that we are here all as mandated reporters, and to make sure that we get the appropriate counsel and support around that place. But let's say it does not rise to a place of mandated report and you're just really concerned. So, that can present in different ways. And that often comes down to, again, I'm going to be the one looking at boundaries, like, who are you in this relationship with this family, right? Mm-hmm. So I highly recommend and suggest to all institutions, from shoals to JCCs to schools to mikvaot, to any place, that we have signage around help for people. Now, my view is around domestic violence, but in general, I think it's very important as a community that we have signage and we just stigmatize getting help, right? It kind of opens the conversation. So if a school in the beginning or every so often in the school year sends out just kind of like, oh, a lot of kids are having a hard time, here are some resources available. There needs to be conversation in our school communities that resources are available and it's okay to access them. Like, this is part of what it means to raise children, right? And we're going to do this together. And so I think that's one part. That's kind of like the macro levels. How do we create a culture that implements the value of making sure that people know that we should be getting help? Now, if you're actually seeing something, now, what does that look like? I'll share some examples of in practice. I got a phone call from and I talk about examples. I talk about patterns, not people. So if you're listening, you know me. I'm not talking about you, but I'm talking about an example I'm thinking of, basically where an assistant principal actually called me about a family that they were very concerned about domestic violence. And they were very close with the mom. They knew her for many years. With her, I don't know how many children she's gone through school. And I coached them into talking to this mother directly about, we are concerned, using I language. I was concerned when this happened. I want to know, is there anything we could do for you? I know there are services out there, and you not being judgmental, not taking that person's self-determination, but making sure that person knew that there are services and they would support them, and gave them a phone number. And that's one level of intervention, right? Knowing your relationship, knowing you're not going to scare that child away and they're never going to bring the kid back, really checking in. And again, Ohel could be supportive and thinking how to have a conversation. We could be supportive and thinking about how to have that conversation. I think of another case of that I worked on where it was early intervention, where a speech therapist called and said, I'm in a home and I'm certain this woman is being isolated and abused. I don't know what to do. And I coached her into how to talk to her. And every time this woman went to do the early intervention with the young child, that's when she had her telehealth, before telehealth was happening, therapy session with me, because that was her only access to a phone. And it was that intense of an intervention, right? Where she was able to they had a relationship, she was taking care of a young child, and this woman had no access to getting help other than using the therapist's phone to call me. And that's how we scheduled our therapy session, and eventually was able to help her look at options. So, to come back to it, what do we do? I think we have to think of, how do we create a culture that we talk about the value of being access to help and making it easy to access help. And our agencies do make it easy to access help. Our services are generally free or very affordable. They're there. We have, our phone numbers. We're culturally sensitive. We're here for you. So we create an environment in which that's known, but also then knowing your relationship. And then it comes down to those boundaries, like what is appropriate to say, and then getting support for yourself to do that. So I think that those are my thoughts around what we should do if you do see something. But know that there's support for you to think that through. There is support for you. Those are hard conversations to have.
Right. I think that we have another question here about, how departmental teachers can encourage teens to build positive connections. I think we've touched on this quite a bit. Some teachers can find it really challenging with teens, particularly having their defenses up, and finding it not cool to build connections all together.
Can I share one thing that we do? We have this,
Sure.
I'm going to plug it. It's very interesting. It started at 8 o'clock tonight also. We have something called the Purple Fellowship. And, when we talk about helping teens find meaning, right, and connecting to things that are more than them, that are of value. And so we have right now on our other Zoom room, something like 78 students from 23 schools who are part of this leadership fellowship program, where they learn about leadership skills through learning about healthy relationships. And then they go back to their school and they present. And last year we do a co-ed group in the fall, and we do an all girls group in the spring. So we, make sure that all schools could participate, but it's an opportunity. Like opportunities like that are really important to students. And a lot of our students are not the most popular students at the school. They're students that are interested in this, and they get to go back to their school and teach about healthy relationships. And then those schools have these conversations. They have these, all school assemblies about what does it mean to have healthy relationships, and the students teach it. So we do look, right? It's really cool. It's one of our coolest programs. I have to say that is really neat for me. But when you see, last year I think we had 105 students participate, and 9,000 kids were impacted by their peers, right? In a discussion around this, and we're helping them own it, right? We're helping teens own it. So to look for opportunities where teens can really become leaders and connect to each other in way around healthy things. And we're not the only people who do programming like that. There are a lot of nonprofits that do programming around important issues where teens can really own it.
I think the biggest piece is the student empowerment, right? And we're
absolutely.
connecting them to, we're connecting them to a cause, and that can often also be within a school itself. There are many initiatives or many things that don't have to be as elaborate, and there are things that children can do, students can do themselves, that really helps them connect to that sense of something greater than myself. So we're going to have to wrap up soon. I just want to ask you another question that came in our question box is, in today's day and age, how do we take care of ourselves as educators as we're trying to take care of the students that we work with, especially students that require that much extra support? How do teachers navigate that balance?
So I think this is a very difficult one, because I think a lot of times when many teachers who go into the field of teaching do so because they want to help and because they want to see people really thrive. And once we get into that space, it can be so hard to let go of a situation that hasn't arrived at the place where we want it to be. It can be really difficult. Like we see one of our students to whom we've invested so much effort and we've put so much time into them, and there's just this one little piece that I have to get right. It can be really hard to let that go. So when we talk about it, when we call it the dynamic of rescuer versus helper, which I think is an appropriate framework for this. We want to make sure that the help that we're giving is help that is necessary. It's help, and I guess with students it's a little different, but keeping in mind what's in the best interest of this child and is not serving my own need to see it through to the end, and is also help that's not impacting my ability to give in other areas of my life. So part of what can contribute to that is really just knowing what the issues themselves are. So, if there's a student who is struggling with depression, understanding what depression is, understanding what, on some level, what best practices might be in your role as a teacher, and then following up through that, whether that's just a matter of checking in on the student or a matter of helping the students get in touch with the guidance counselor, but understanding exactly the concrete steps to what's really in your control to do, understanding what those are, and then following up through them, getting whatever social support might be. I personally, I feel that it would be so helpful. I know it's helpful for me as a therapist, and I feel that there are many professions, and certainly teachers, which would benefit from this. The idea of having peer supervision where people just discuss different ways to deal with a particularly challenging situation. Mentorship, speaking with educators who are more experienced and been around the block a few times more than we have, and getting their input on certain situations, and just like, you have a direction, and then really being able to just assert healthy boundaries for yourself, just to be able to keep yourself like, okay, this, I'm going to deal with it up until this point, and beyond this point, I'm going to have to take a step back, knowing that this is my boundary, this is what I feel comfortable doing, and trusting that you're going to be able to keep those boundaries. I think those are all really important points to being able to deal with it. And it's not going to make it easy. It's not going to make it fun. It's not going to make it something which is remarkably comfortable. It's not by any stretch of the imagination. It's not a walk in the park, but it will make it something which can help you to stay balanced and on track with where you want your student to get to and where you want to get to yourself.
Right, right. Can I just ask, a question came in the Q&A box. If a school or anyone would like to get in touch with your organization and find out more about your leadership programs, how can they do that?
Education at shalomtaskforce.org. Or
Okay.
just come to our website. It's on our website, shalomtaskforce.org. You'll be able to contact us under info. We'd love to work with you.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So it's really been a pleasure hosting you tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for attending. A recording of this will be placed on our website within the coming few days. If you'd like to reach Ohel's Teacher Support Helpline, you can always email us, teachersupport@ohelfamily.org, or you can call our helpline 718-686-3230. We're staffed from Monday through Thursday, 12 till 2 p.m., 4 to 6 p.m., and 9 to 10 p.m. And you can also reach out to us about any of the programs that we have for schools as well. Thank you, everybody, and wishing you all a wonderful week and best of luck with the coming few months. All the best. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.